Hello, fellow flamenco enthusiasts, and welcome to Everything Flamenco. I'm your host, La Jugo, and this is finally the end of the Carmen series. I know some of you really enjoyed it. Others might not have, although I only got good comments, so that was really nice. So let's finish off this little series with episode 45 on Carmen, the movies, and the adaptations. So today we're going to just do a light touch on all the movies that have been released about Carmen. So many are adapted from Georges Bizet's opera, and some are adapted directly from Prosper Mérimée's book. There has been, oh gosh, you guys, you don't understand. I even got tired of reading the list, but there's been scores and scores and scores of movies about this story. So I'm really not going to bore you with all of them. We will just quickly touch on the ones that are a bit unusual, and then we'll get right back into the flamenco theme with Carlos Saura and Antonio Gades' flamenco adaptation. So some of the unusual or more out of the ordinary ones that I've found movies. The first one was actually a Charlie Chaplin movie. So Charlie Chaplin released the movie called A Burlesque on Carmen on 18 December 1915. And the film he made was a parody of another Carmen film, which was released in 1915, also in 1915. So during that time, there's so many movies on Carmen during that period. So Carmen was really an extremely popular synopsis choice during that time. And Chaplin thought it was really a good time then to do something different and do a parody on the story. Charlie Chaplin adapted the film to include the role of an officer called Don Hosiery, which was portrayed by himself, and I actually thought it was quite funny. Don Hosiery, because Don, it's spelled D-A-R-N, so like you darn socks and stockings and things. And hosiery is an older word for stockings. He portrayed this officer. Yeah, I couldn't find the reason for him choosing the name, but the movie is a burlesque, so maybe it was a play on words on that, or poking fun at mending stockings, which the dancers that dance burlesque probably have to do all the time. So yeah, that was the one by Charlie Chaplin. And in 1919, there was a Dutch film called Een Carmen van het Noorden, or A Carmen of the North, which was a silent film that played off during the Great War or the First World War. And then in 1954, there was Carmen Jones, which is an African-American musical film that was set during the Second World War. And it was based on a Broadway musical of 1943 with the same name. This musical focuses on Carmen Jones, who works in a parachute factory in North Carolina. And what is interesting is that this version actually received 2 nominations for an Academy Award. He also won 2 Golden Globes, and in 1992, it was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being, and I quote, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Quite interesting. And then in 1967, there was a Western film adaptation of Carmen called Man, Pride, and Vengeance. And in 1990, there was another movie called Carmen on Ice, which was a dance film with a choreography for figure skaters that was made in Germany. In 2001, I don't know how many of you are Beyoncé lovers, but I think she's also one of those artists, either you love her or you can't stand her. But yeah, she starred in 2001 in the movie Carmen, a hip opera, and it was a musical romantic drama television film. And this movie was set in Philadelphia and Los Angeles and featured mostly original hip hop and R&B music instead of Bizet's music. And so funny that by chance I just came upon this. I didn't even know about this one. But really interesting is that actually a South African film was also made about this story called O Carmen e Kaelicha. It's a 2005 South African operatic film. Those of you that don't know, Kaelicha is a township in the Western Cape, and it's deemed one of the largest in South Africa. And this movie was shot entirely in Xhosa, and it combines both music from the original opera with traditional African music, which was conducted and directed by the British conductor Charles Hazelwood. And apparently, none of the cast members in this movie had ever acted on a film before. Then there was another one called Carmen's Kiss in 2011, and that was a British thriller film telling the tragic story of Joe, who was a police sergeant in London, who falls for Carmen, who was a feisty gypsy girl, but she was the victim of an Eastern European gang of sex traffickers in that movie. I haven't seen it, but yeah. And also, Carmen featured in a cartoon. So this is technically not a movie, unless you watch Tom and Jerry the movie, but Carmen featured in an episode of Tom and Jerry called Carmen Get It. And that was released in 1962. And the synopsis of the episode is that Tom chases Jerry into an opera house where Carmen is performed. And as per usual, chaos just ensues. And you can watch that little episode on YouTube. I also tried to find some movies on the streaming media that I can suggest to you to go and watch. And the only one I could find was a 2003 Spanish adaptation of Mérimée's book called Carmen, which features Paz Vega in the role of Carmen, and that is available on Amazon Prime, so you can go and watch it there. Those are the most unusual movie adaptations that I found, except, of course, the Carmen movie adaptation by Antonio Gades and Carlos Saura, which I kept for last because it is the one with a real flamenco connection. And in my opinion, I'm keeping the best for last. And finally, at the end of this series, now really getting back into the flamenco swing of things. So, as you've probably also deduced from the previous episodes where we talked about Bizet's work, his opera was really very stereotypical Spanish and was riddled with Spanish cliches, giving a more French feel than flamenco and Andalusian. Saura and Gades found this a bit wearisome, so they decided to make a film with a much stronger flamenco connection. Their film Carmen came out in 1983, and it was one installment of Saura's Flamenco Trilogy in the 1980s. The first one was La Boda Sangre, then it was Carmen, and then it was El Amor Brujo. And we briefly spoke about these films in episode 32, where I discussed gifts for flamenco dancers. So if you want to go back to other movies and things for gifts for flamenco dancers, go and listen to episode 32. I must be honest, this adaptation of Saura and Gades, I've only seen it once, but I absolutely love the scene in the tobacco factory, La Tabacalera, and that scene I have watched 1,000 times. There's this part where they just make rhythm with their hands on the tables first, and the singing starts, and it is just, it's absolutely mesmerizing. And then the standoff between the two women starts, and it's just the attitude, and it gives me absolute goosebumps, and I can really still watch it another 1,000 times. And you can find a clip of this scene, La Tabacalera. You can also find this on YouTube. So for this specific movie, the flamenco theme is much stronger than with any of the operas or movies, as I've said now before. Antonio Gades and Maria Pages did the choreography, really focusing on the flamenco style. And Antonio was also a flamenco dancer, so he fulfilled the lead actor role by the same name. Although the film is based on the Prosper Mérimée novella, it's not the main story, but it's the backdrop of a similar course of events for the role players of the film. So in the film, Antonio Gades plays a version of himself. I mean, as I said, he also uses the same name. And in the film, he's putting together a more authentic presentation of the story of Carmen, using stronger Spanish influences in the music, like the guitar instead of an orchestra, and using more flamenco rhythms than classical ones. And apparently, I only found it in one reference, so I might be wrong, but apparently he worked with the famous Paco de Lucia on the music. In this film, Antonio and his group of performers work hard to find the right woman to be casted in the role of Carmen and to portray the image that he's trying to create. So it's actually a movie about the novella, but in the backdrop, the novella is also taking place. So Antonio really wants his version of Carmen to make a lasting impression, and he wants the right mix of technical skill, but also attitude and stage presence, and of course, beauty. So, as you know now from listening to the whole story of Carmen, she was quite a force of nature. And to portray that, but then with a flamenco flair, is very difficult, I would think, like a really strong flamenco presence. So, in the film, there's the lead female dancer in the troupe, Christina, and she really wants the part, but Antonio doesn't think she's right for it. And in Antonio's search for the right Carmen, he then finds a previously unknown young dancer who happens to be named Carmen as well. And he sees her at an open audition where she barges in late and casually auditioned in jeans while smoking a cigarette. And if you recall, in one of the earliest episodes, I mentioned going to my first class in a pair of jeans. So, but I don't think she was as uninformed as myself. Maybe it was just a daring move. But yeah, so Goddess was convinced and immediately felt that she had all the dynamics that he was looking for, and then he gives her the part. Christina really does not like this, as she really wanted the lead because, as you know, she was the female lead dancer in the troupe. But to make things even worse, she's then asked to help Carmen with her technical skills. And because of this all, Christina really takes a strong dislike to the younger woman, who she obviously sees as a rival. Antonio, who is playing opera Carmen's lover, Don Jose, in the show, is in real life soon enchanted with dancer Carmen, the spirited beauty, and they start having a tempestuous love affair. So it's the novella playing out in real life in this movie. And then it comes to light that Carmen, the dancer, is actually married. So another secret in real life that played out, same as the book. So the real Carmen's husband was imprisoned on drug charges, but he was then released and re-entered her life. And then that made Antonio realize that this gives the two of them no future, obviously, because the husband is now out of prison. But Carmen, as typical Carmen, refuses to break off the affair. She likes the drama, obviously, and she pulls Antonio back into a web. And then they're acting out the plot of the opera in their own lives. So to the end. So since we have a little bit of time in this episode, I don't even know if it's going to be a full 20 minutes. But yeah, that was the flamenco movie adaptation of Carmen. So since we have a little bit of time, we can then also touch on La Boda Sangre, or other people call it Bodas de Sangre, and then the third movie, El Amor Brujo, of the trilogy of Gades and Saura. So, as I've said before, the first film of the trilogy was Bodas de Sangre, or La Boda Sangre, which is translated into Blood Wedding. And this movie was released in 1981. And like Carmen, this film was also an adaptation from another work, which was a play by Federico Garcia Lorca. And again, the backdrop for the film is rehearsals for a flamenco adaptation of the play, where Carmen then was rehearsals for a flamenco adaptation of the Prosper Mérimée book. Antonio Gades features in this film as well as Leonardo, who was the bride's first love. So the bride runs away with Leonardo on her wedding night, and a fight to the death ensues between Leonardo and the groom. And Carmen Villena, who plays the wife, really stands out in her role because she conveys deep emotion through her dance and acting, really portraying the wife's attempts to win back her husband, Leonardo, while suspecting the bride of being involved in the affair. So it's a bit confusing. So there's a bride and a groom, and then there's the wife and Leonardo. So the wife is Leonardo's wife, and then the bride and the groom is obviously the characters from the wedding. The wedding. So the film closely follows the plot of the play of Lorca, with a story told through dance and gestures and music and pantomime. But again, flamenco forms an integral part of the experience, with the dancers performing movements that embody the passion and spirit of the art form. But something that's really stands out and that's also interesting about this movie is that the first 30 minutes or so, we actually just see the cast and crew preparing for a full dress rehearsal. So it's almost as if you have a behind the curtain look on what goes on with the preparations. And there's really no inclination of the storyline that forms the middle point of the movie. So you'll see the crew setting up the dressing room and so forth before the actors arrive. And you see the actors applying makeup, warming their voices and things like that. And after a few shots of this, then Antonio Gades gets ready, and then he reflects on his career through an inner monologue. And in this film, the dancers interact as if they're preparing in private, but we as the audience actually feel like we're lucky to witness the process. So it's like you've got a special VIP backstage look into what they are doing. And this sense of exclusion or insider knowledge that Saura creates is central to the film's atmosphere. Then the third movie in the trilogy is El Amor Brujo, which is another adaptation, this time a ballet by Manuel de Falla of the same name. And El Amor Brujo is a passionate and haunting tale of love, loss, and redemption, really brought to life by director Carlos Saura and the exceptional talents of Antonio Gades and his troupe. So he uses his troupe through all three of the movies. And in this film, it's really captivating the fusion of dance and music and film that is set against the backdrop of a gypsy camp, where the vibrant energy of flamenco reflects the tension between the rawness of life and the shadow of death. Oh, I'm getting really deep into these things now. But there's really a lot of imagery and atmosphere and feeling that they created in these movies. And the world that Saura creates is one where desire is intoxicating and love is both transformative and destructive. And if you haven't been really in love yet and you're still young and finding your feet and things, this might put you off for love life because it just seems like everybody ends up dying. But anyway, so in Amor Brujo, at the heart of the story is Candela, who is played by the amazing Cristina Hoyos. And the plot is that Candela is promised to Jose by their fathers when they were gypsy children. Their love just seemed doomed from the start, as after their marriage they are both unfaithful. Candela with Carmelo, who is portrayed by Antonio Gades, and then Jose with Lucia. And when Jose meets his violent death, Candela's soul remains haunted by his ghost, while she's torn between her love for the departed and her devotion to Carmelo, the man who returns after a long absence. And the gripping drama unfolds as Carmelo fights to break the curse that binds Candela, relying on sorcery and the intervention of Lucia, who he had an affair with, but she was a seductive and mysterious figure who was played by Laura del Sol. And this film's power really lies in its dynamic performances, particularly in the choreography by Gades and the emotionally charged dances that communicate the unspeakable depth of passion. And in this film, the music was sung by famed flamenco pop star Rocio Jurado, and this further amplifies the soul-stirring atmosphere. And Saura's masterful direction really ensured a seamless connection between the camera and the dancers. Carmen was obviously the most recognized of the three films, but other critics might argue that El Amor Brujo was the better film, really standing out as an extraordinary cinematic achievement. So, yeah, that is the Flamenco Trilogy, and that is the end of Carmen. So just before I end of the episode, I want to just tell you a little bit about Antonio Gades. He was a dancer and a choreographer. He was born in Elda in the Valencian community in 1936, and he specialized in Spanish folklore through its diverse branches of dance. And in 1964, he represented Spain at the World Fair in New York and founded the Spanish National Ballet in 1978, of which he was the director. And he unfortunately died of cancer in Madrid in 2004. That was the end of the Carmen series. I hope you enjoyed it. I promise I won't read La Boda Sangre or El Amor Brujo to you, although I immensely enjoyed this little series and I really learned a lot, and I hope you did too. And next week we'll get into some really good, solid flamenco stuff again. So until then, when I speak to you in the next episode, olé!